Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We are excited to be with you here at Fintech South and continuing to be talking about identity and privacy. I'm Eric Byunn. I'm a partner at a growth equity firm that is specifically focused on fintech and all sorts of innovation around financial services. I am actually originally a Southerner as well, having been born and raised in the fine state of Tennessee and lived a number of years in Atlanta as well. And so I'm super excited to be here because it's both a region of the country I love and again, what we do is focus on fintech and innovation in financial services. So the subject is exactly what we love. Again, Centana Growth Partners, we're a growth equity firm, a little over 600 million under management, purely and exclusively focused on this fintech and financial services sector and making growth equity investments in exciting, innovative companies. And with that, we are invested in multiple companies in the identity and privacy category. And for today, I'm really delighted to be joined by the CEO of one of those companies that we're lucky enough to be invested in, an identity-related company called Jumio. So let me introduce Robert Prigge, CEO of Jumio, and ask you to introduce both yourself and a quick overview of what the company does to provide relevance to our topic today.
Sure. So thanks, Eric. Pleasure to be here. I'm from the south side of Chicago, so hopefully I'm an honorary Southerner. I don't know if that makes the cut or not. But I'm the CEO of Jumio. We're the world's largest identity verification provider. We have an end-to-end solution that covers KYC through AML transaction monitoring. We're by far and away the world's largest with global scale and reach. We're AI and machine learning powered, so that we've got automated solutions as well as hybrid models. Ultimately, we're the way that companies know who you are and establish trust remotely. Almost everyone else in the space checks out who you say you are. We're one of the very rare companies that actually confirms who you are. And now, especially during COVID, that's more important than ever when everything is turning remote and you really need to know who you're dealing with.
Great, so perfect. So that's a perfect launch point for us here. Obviously in this track, people have been talking about privacy and about some of the security issues around digital identity. But in this world where identity verification is so important, how is that coming together with some of the things that have to happen? So things like KYC, things like AML, what are we seeing in terms of how that is converging or not converging?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing a lot of convergence of these different areas. And the CEO of Microsoft, was saying that there's been more digital transformation in the last 2 months than the last 2 years. And I think that's true, everywhere in the space, that instead of technology disrupting things, it's now, COVID and the real world driving innovation and consolidation. As of today, only about 15% of identity proofing and affirmation is done by a single vendor when you look at customers. But according to recent studies, by 2023, which is not that far away, 75% of organizations are just going to be using a single vendor. And so what that means is we can expect a lot of consolidation in this space. People like Jumio and others that do everything from address verification, identity verification, biometrics, authentication, PEPs and sanction screening, AML transaction monitoring. Ultimately, the customers want a single source of truth. They want to be able to orchestrate within all of those different areas. They want to cut down on the vendor relationships and then be able to kind of expand globally. I think we're moving from the point product era into the kind of total solution and suite area where the companies don't want to create a Frankenstein's monster of 60 different vendors. They'd rather just pick 1 or 2 trusted partners, integrate those, and then be able to get access to services, not only in the short term for today, but also to future-proof themselves as well, so that when they expand into Asia, they can use their existing infrastructure or build out more in LATAM or whatever the case may be. They can add on new services without adding on new vendors. So I think we'll see more companies doing that by reselling, other third-party solutions. We'll see M&A transactions. We had just done one a week or two ago where we purchased the AML platform of Byunn Solutions. So I think I'd say watch this space, that more and more, I think there'll be consolidation to a few major winners, of which we intend to be one.
So you're predicting the world's going to get easier for those identity, privacy, compliance managers who might be in our audience today?
Absolutely, and I think easier is a hard word. We're always in a arms race against the fraudsters, who we've seen massive spikes in the amount of fraud during COVID, because now everything is moving remote, and frankly, people are just not prepared for that. We've seen presentations here at Fintech South around people speaking to that around synthetic identities and credential stuffing and all these other attack vectors, that it'll be easier from a vendor management point of view, but I think a lot of the focus will be on the increased surface area of the attacks from the fraudsters who suddenly have a lot of new entrants into this digital space who don't have the experience of knowing how to protect themselves and keep not only their customers, but also their own business safe.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Well, look, I know that Gartner has really also kind of talked about this convergence in this overall space as the anti-fraud stuff and the concept of authentication and just overall identity proofing are all coming together according to their recent market guide. You also alluded to what we're seeing in the pandemic right now. So with COVID or in the COVID era, are you seeing some of these trends accelerate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Gartner is a great thought leader on the topic, as are many other people. But across the board, when you look at the data, we can see a profound impact. That we talk a lot about contactless delivery, for DoorDash or whatever, but we're now migrating to contactless business. That if you're a bank, you can't really have your branch anymore where people are, giving their ID across and exposing people to sickness. If you're an airline, you can't be checking identity documents. And so when you look at the research of people like Gartner, Gartner just had a very recent one with Khan that was talking about how right now there's really two camps. There's the kind of document-centric identity proofing, which is what we do, which is really around a government-issued ID or passport, national ID, that sort of thing, or around data identity affirmation, which is really checking out other things about you. Which is really creating confidence in who you are, but not really proving who you are. And what's really interesting is in the Gartner data, they'll say that as of today or as of the time of the study, 30% of the business is the document-centric and 70% is around the identity affirmation, the databases or attributes. And just by 2022, which is a year and a half away at this point, it's going to shift from 30-70 to 80-20. So I think Gartner is expecting a size
where 80% is the
document centric, right? And part of the reason for that is I kind of said it in my own intro that my company and people like us check out who you really are, and almost everyone else focuses on who you say you are. Thanks to the literally countless data breaches that exist, and thanks to all of these other, attack vectors, that sort of information really just provides more confidence in who you are, but it doesn't prove who you are. So when you look at the Gartner research, they only list one single way underneath the document-centric, and that's to do identity proofing, using a government-issued ID. So I think we're going to see a massive flip, so that when you look at that affirmation, which is checking out things about you, that's there's 5 different areas. There's data-centric, device-centric, behavioral analytics, phone number, and then digital attributes. it kind of goes back to the classic. People always used to talk about the things you know, the things you are, which are biometrics, and the things you have. The things you know are increasingly irrelevant because if anything, the fraudsters know it better than you do. That they know, you know, all of your old mortgage payments, and they've got your passwords and all this.
Yeah, I don't remember my address in Atlanta anymore. That was a while ago.
But I do. I've got a database that has it. And so I think what we're seeing is a real seismic shift in the identity space. That yes, it's nice to have all of that other ancillary information that gives you more confidence, but we're seeing a real shift in the identity documents themselves, so that you know who you're dealing with, and then that, of course, will be bleeding into digital identity as well in the future. But that's a big shift.
Yeah, and of course that seems to make sense. I mean, it's more analogous to what we used to do, right? We don't walk around in the regular world and prove who we are by being like, yeah, I know this and I'm wearing this and that kind of thing. We whip out our driver's license or passport or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So that certainly speaks to both that convergence we're seeing in COVID and how that digital and COVID era stuff is tracking. Are the regulatory elements, I mean, KYC and AML are, of course, very regulatory specific. Are the regulatory elements tracking with these kinds of methods?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably two different answers to that. There's domestic US and then there's global. I think we're seeing a lot of evolution in this area where, like within the United States, as an example, Portland, Oregon, you know, the other day just banned facial biometrics when you're just kind of walking around, which is very, very different than what we do, which is kind of matching your selfie to your document, which is a kind of one-to-one comparison. But what we're seeing is a lot of fragmentation where every jurisdiction has a different approach. So California with the CCPA will have a different approach than Illinois with BIPA and the countless list of states. And that's just domestic US. And then when you look internationally, there's other issues around GDPR, and then country by country, people have different takes on it. So I think what we're seeing is people getting this, understanding it, and embracing it. I think that they do increasingly understand the difference between knowing who someone is in real time and knowing things about them. And so I think more and more the regulators worldwide have migrated more towards like biometrics than data. So increasingly it'll be selfie photographs or 3D face maps. Sometimes it's videos, you know, depending on the jurisdiction. So I think they get it, but I think what we see is this space is so rapidly evolving. I think they have a hard time keeping up with it. I think they struggle with consolidating those learnings across large regions or whole countries. And so I think a lot of the intent is good. When you look at things like GDPR or CCPA or others, the real intent is to put the consumer more in charge of their own identity and what people can do with it and when and why. And so the intent is good. But I think what we're seeing is, from a regulatory point of view, things are fragmenting even more, so that only specialists, you know, people like us that are in the business and do this globally can kind of, you know, we do this full time. Like I think if you're a regular company, I don't know how you keep up with all of these things, with all of the different laws in all the different states. So while the intent is good, I think we're probably expecting it to get worse before it gets better, and worse meaning more fragmentation with way more laws in different states. And then, by the way, you know, is the issue when you're living in the state, when you're visiting the state, when you have that state's ID document, you know, it's pretty challenging. So the regulatory landscape is trying to change rapidly, but I think it's also too many initiatives at the same time instead of a few consolidated ones.
Yeah, so I certainly know you and the the Jumio team spend significant mind share on keeping on top of all that fragmented landscape. So turning a little bit to some of the technologies, you talked about biometrics. How are biometrics being used, not in the Portland sense, but in the sort of banking and cybersecurity, financial services sense?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a real shift, towards biometrics, and that can mean a lot of things. Most often people think of faces, but there's a lot of other things that can be, the way you type in, or the way you walk, even with gait analysis. There's a bunch of different biometrics that can be tracked. Although interesting, Lee, there's also now potential breaches of biometric information, which is its own, challenge. But in general, biometrics are the future, and I think people find them to be the hardest to crack. Although, again, when you look at people like Gartner and whatever other major researchers, what they really recommend is when you're onboarding your customer, that's the time that you bind them to those biometrics. So the kind of old style would be to sign up a customer, let them be a customer for 6 or 12 months, and then to let them, register their biometrics. The problem is that could be someone doing an account takeover. So, Robert Prigge signs up for the account, doesn't access it that often. Someone else can access it and then register their biometrics. So what people like Gartner and other recommend is that you bind at least, one biometric at the time of onboarding, because that's when you know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the right individual in real time, so that whether it's a voice or a face, that that's them. And then later, whether it's 6 or 12 months down the line, you have them match their face or voice, and then you can record other biometrics. But I think we're still seeing a disconnect in the industry, in fintech, where they're still too much separated in time, and they really need to be brought together, so that at onboarding, when you know exactly who you're dealing with, is the time that you want to catch it. And then that way, whether it's months or days later, it's still the biometric for the right individual, because account takeover and a lot of identity theft are major problems that have only increased during COVID, now that everyone's at home, and increasing the amount of things that they have online.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And by the way, if we were lucky enough to all be assembled in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, we would turn to the audience now and ask for questions. But of course, since we're virtual, we can't do that. But let me again say, if you've got any questions, feel free to pose them here in the interface. And of course, we'll do our best to respond. But continuing on this technology theme, so that was a little bit about biometrics. Of course, I know the other thing that Jumio uses a lot of is AI. How does AI help with this identity question? How does it interact with the biometrics?
Yeah, AI in machine learning is incredibly powerful, and we have probably the largest database in the world outside of places like Interpol and others. But I think what people get hung up on is they think that it's about the algorithm and how smart things are, and that's not really the case. It's more data beats better algorithms, and that in our case, it's about training against the 300 million different identities that have gone by. It's about tagging. So in our case, we've got hundreds of people that work on that, and so what the tagging accomplishes is letting you train your models based off of the real data. It lets you audit the data to make sure you're getting the right things, and it makes sure that the datas are optimal, based on the different ID types and other things. But I think where it's not a catch-all, and it doesn't fix everything, especially in 2020. There's a lot of news around these technologies not doing very well with different demographics. And so, the data is trained against American citizens or whatever, and so it falls apart when you go into parts of Asia or Africa or elsewhere. So according to recent data, as of today, about 15% of RFPs specifically refer to vendors making sure that they've got requirements minimizing demographic bias, i.e., different parts of facial structure and background and other things. But by 2022, that's going to be 95%. And so I think this is an area that people really underestimate. That you can train the AI and the ML, but a lot of it depends on the data, and unless you've got a sufficient amount of data that can train and get rid of those biases, it's incredibly difficult. And so while the AI and the ML is absolutely part of the solution, I think it's also not you write a code in a garage and suddenly it fixes the problem. You need to be looking at hundreds of millions of transactions and then learning from it. But that's good news, because I think eliminating those sorts of biases will help the industry, and I think help the world in general.
Yeah. So regardless of your politics in these divisive times, it sounds like it's just good business that you need to have a data set large enough to train on all these global diverse populations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people really underestimate how important the data is and the tagging. That, like I said, the data trumps the algorithms, and there's so much complexity. When you look at this area, just the United States might as well be 50 different countries, much as well. When you look at the entire planet. So there's so much complexity in the different ID types. I live in California. I want to say there's like 13 different driver's license types, that didn't need to be tracked, plus, all of the different years worth of data. So it's a really daunting task, but all of us in the identity space, we're all working really hard because we believe that you can make e-commerce safe, you can protect the consumer, you can protect the customer. My wife herself had her identity stolen prior to me joining Jumio because she was working on a site where they just asked for a name and social security number and address, and that kind of goes back to so they were checking information about her, not really who she was. So I think when we look at 2021, 2022, I think that's going to be the big trend that dies, is that becomes a lot more secondary, and then we're going to see a lot more adoption of biometrics, which are absolutely the future of identity.
Got it. Okay. And quickly, a last question here. How do you see the different groups getting within customers, within prospects, kind of interacting, whether that's these data governance teams, the technology teams, the security and anti-fraud teams? How do they, which one of those have to get pulled in to kind of take responsibility for these issues?
Ultimately, they all work together and they understand the importance of it. I think in general, that deals don't happen and projects don't happen because security is not brought in often enough. About a quarter of the time, it can be the security department that quashes in effort, and part of because they're not brought in early enough, or they're not brought in at all. And then when you're getting your final sign off on trying to go live, the security people look at it and they say, yeah, this is not acceptable. So I'd say the security departments absolutely need to be looped in way earlier and way better. And then especially in fintech, interfacing with regulators, making sure that they understand the solution being put forward and signing off on it, and making sure that you pick a vendor that's already done that stuff and has the right paperwork and pedigree.
Got it. Awesome. Well, look, unfortunately, I'm getting the signal that we're basically out of time here, but I think certainly something we can all agree on are that these issues around identity and privacy and KYC and AML, all of critical importance, whether you're a traditional bank or new upstart fintech, or any of the folks playing anywhere around this space, these questions of identity and data are critically important. Robert, thanks for joining me. Fintech South, thank you to all for having us, and we'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Eric and Robert. What a great discussion. When I hear, I think these themes bring back to me, kind of the same core issues that we started with today, which is we need more data to do everything we do better. We need to collect it. It needs to be high quality to the greatest degree possible. But we also recognize that there are a lot of stakeholders at play that need to be informed and brought in. And Robert, you brought up some of those issues in the discussion that you were having. So thinking about how to get technology on board with compliance, with privacy, with security, even with legal in some cases, to have a point of view on how data should be treated and how to continue to build trust, both with internally with your own set of data, but also with consumers and helping them get comfortable that you're good stewards of their data. To me, this kind of points back to the same issues. I hope we all see that these risk areas are related, that they should be thought about together, that governing that data requires thinking about cross-functional teams across those areas to get all the stakeholders thinking together about the risks and the value that data presents. And then think about discover, like finding all of the data in your environment, separating high value from low value data so that you can benefit from the things that you could benefit from, and you can dispose of things that merely present risk and don't do anything else. Thinking about minimizing, right? Again, disposal of data is an imperative that has the potential to unhide and unlock high value data that's buried amidst a swath of low value unstructured data sitting out in your environment. So when I think about all of these things together, and I think these themes today show that the amount of risk, the number of regulations, the complexity of those regulations are continuing to increase. I think I see more and more opportunities for us to think about data risk collectively as a group of risk managers, and to focus on the concept of building data trust. Doing that and getting better at this is not only going to make us more capable of responding to regulators and doing what we need to do from a data protection perspective, but it's going to unlock data that we can actually get value from, help us serve our customers better, and help them it's more that what we're doing is providing them valuable services that can improve their overall experience of us and what we have to offer. So delighted to be here today. We're thrilled to be able to sponsor this event, and I hope everyone's achieved or learned a little something in this process. Have a great day, and thank you so much for involving us.